each one of us at the table knows that one day we'll be part of the meal. I just absolutely loved that. It's like, feel that we're in this position of great privilege of being, here and cognizant of the rest of it. But you know what? Our atoms will dissolve away and they will eventually become part of the meal.
It's not. I watched your fingers dancing on my guitar. I watched the empires rise.
All right. Oh, that was my Matthew McConaughey.
All right.
Man, dang it. Welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast, everybody. We are your hosts. I'm Adam Narlock.
And I'm John Williamson, and boy, are we both exhausted.
John's in the middle of moving. I'm job transitioning. Neither of us have any rhythm in our life, and we have large, dark circles under our eyes. But we're still smiling.
We're still here.
We're still here for you, bringing you the juice. Today, we've got another friend of the good Dr. Peter Rollins.
Yeah.
Another kind of avant-garde philosopher and theologian.
Mathematician? Is that
math teacher.
Math
teacher. Another great accent. I mean, can we just do the American thing and talk about, he's enjoyable to listen to.
We have accent envy in America.
And
because we have accents no offense, but we have some pretty, I won't even name any specific geographical accents, but they're pretty bad.
There's some ugly ones.
Yeah.
I don't think the Midwest is a little nasally. We're probably a little nasally.
Yeah.
But I would just wish that I had a nice British accent.
Right.
I know. Anyway, so we're thankful to our beloved friend Pete Rollins for introducing us to this fantastic guest. So who do we got here, John?
We have Kester Brewin.
Kester freaking Brewin.
Yep, he is, as you said, he's a math teacher, philosopher. He probably fits into that pyrotheology category.
Oh yeah, pyro-radical theology, that kind of deal. Yep.
Yeah, just a really interesting guy. He's done a TEDx. He kind of started off for the Huffington Post.
Yeah, in the emerging church.
Yes.
Kind of deal. And then was like, that's not far enough. Ooh, what do you mean?
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Really interesting, because his work is interesting. His work is really interesting. All of these things kind of come together in his work, and he does a really good job surveying culture and looking at kind of, the commonalities between things that are going on in different parts of the culture that are all getting at the same thing, and maybe they don't even know it.
Yeah.
So in his book, Getting High, which we spend a whole lot of time talking about, which is just a great title.
Yeah. To be clear, it has an airplane on the front.
It does, like a jet.
Or a shuttle.
Like a shuttle.
Is that a shuttle? Yeah,
I think it's a shuttle.
Yeah.
So, just to be clear, one of the things that John and it kind of launched us into this project in a way, is we hated the escapism in a lot of what theology was. It's all about going to heaven someday. The world can go to hell in a handbasket. It doesn't even matter. It's all this really ethereal, kind of out there. Your beliefs even kind of exist out there. And Kester really talks about a lot of that stuff in this book, this need to escape, this need to get high, all these different avenues that we do this. So it was a really fun conversation. Really fun.
Yeah, you guys are going to like it. Before we get to the episode, though, just some house cleaning stuff. We have that Alive event coming up.
Oh, yeah.
April 28th in Denver, Colorado. So if you guys are from that area, around that area, we still have some tickets available. They are only $10. If you go to eventbrite.com and search the Deconstructionist Live, it'll come up. Or if you go to our website, www.thedeconstructionist.com, click on the event tab, and it'll take you right to tickets. Tell your friends, and come on out for a fun evening. We got some surprises in store. We got a little music. We're going to have a good time. So
it's going to be so much fun. Just to be together, to talk, to do this together. Man, we are excited to come out and hang out with you guys. Thanks for making yourselves available. Get yourself some tickets. Tell your friends. It's going to be a good time. And the $10 really just goes to cover the venue so we can all hang out.
Yep.
And what else? Thanks to the Patreon people.
Yeah.
If you've ordered some stuff, we're a little backed up because our lives are in disarray, but
yeah, our studio is moving.
Hang tight. And just hope you guys are having a great year. This is a fun episode. You guys are going to enjoy it. You got anything else?
No.
Without further ado, Kester freaking Brewin.
Dancing on my guitar. I
All right, everybody. Well, it's my honor, and I'm pretty stoked to bring you guys a really, really fun, interesting guest, Kester Brewin, all the way from UK, staying up late tonight, having a little port. Thank you so much for hanging with us on the Deconstructionist podcast today. This is going to be a fun conversation. Thanks for making some time.
Really looking forward to it. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Well, I think that you have a very interesting backstory. So I think the proper place to start would be to talk about kind of your background. We know a little bit, but we like for you to kind of lay it out to the audience a little bit. You definitely grew up in a similar upbringing to me, it sounds like, a very religious upbringing, kind of raised in the church, as it were, even singing in the choir, I think I heard you say once. So talk a little bit about that and kind of how you were raised.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back a hell of a long way, before me, for sure. I mean, I think my great-grandfather, was kind of some preacher dude in Scotland and all the rest of it. My dad is a Church of England minister. So is my uncle, so is like another uncle. I mean, it's just like completely in the family. So, I was brought up, definitely kind of growing up in and around the church and, completely in that myself. Singing in the choir, as you said, I wasn't actually very good, I have to say. So, but I enjoyed wearing the dresses. So,
right.
You loved it.
Anyway, and then it was kind of funny actually, because then we had the whole kind of you guys remember like the Kansas City Prophets, like those guys came over to my dad's church. There's all this kind of really big style charismatic thing going on as well.
All right.
I ended up heading down to university in Bristol, and you know what, I was actually pretty ready just to take some time out from that. And then literally the first person I met at university was like, hey, you fancy coming to church on Sunday night? So I was like, okay, yeah, come on then, let's go back. So, so I kind of got into that too. Then like Toronto blessing hit, if you remember that stuff.
Oh yeah, there you go.
That was like a massive craziness. But weirdly, it was almost like the beginning of the end in many ways for me, because it was like, oh, okay. Here is this intense experience, but what's actually happening in terms of change, what's actually going on politically for people, what's happening in terms of justice, like, what other than, people rolling around laughing is actually going on. And also, like, this is a fairly wealthy part of London that this church was based in, where I was going at the time. And it's like, well, hold on a minute, why is God putting gold in the mouths of like the rich people when there's some people who probably, couldn't really do with that. So from that, I kind of started heading from the front pew towards the back pew, and then ended up out the back door and met some very cool creative people. And we set up a thing called Vox, which was like it was a number of things. I mean, it was a kind of architecture practice, I suppose. We designed spaces within which people could experience, different forms of worship, could kind of explore different kinds of theological expression. There was a lot of films, a lot of dance, there was a lot of kind of poetry and visual art stuff going on, which was quite radical at the time.
Yeah.
This is like mid-90s. And I guess it was like moving from a kind of big cruise liner down to a tiny yacht, like you feel every wave and you're kind of in control a bit and you're heading off in a different space, and it's not like the whole entertainment's put on for you. So it was, it's a different vehicle, and that kind of led us into really kind of great questions about what the whole thing was about. And I suppose it ended up as a kind of exit vehicle for us from mainstream Christianity. Now, it was actually then through that I was kind of doing a bit of blogging about Vox stuff, and people were writing PhDs about it. Don't ask me why. I mean, it didn't seem like worthy of a PhD to us, like both people who came thought it was all right, but, but yes, out of that came a first book. And I guess the writing has then very naturally become for me a way of sort of interrogating the world and faith and all that kind of stuff. So it's been through that I've kind of pushed on and carried on exploring, which has been just a really, really interesting journey. And for many people, they would definitely say, oh, you're not a Christian anymore. I would kind of say like, oh, I kind of think I'm more of a Christian than I ever was before. But, hey, who's using labels? So, so it's kind of through that got into I suppose, what people might call the radical theology movement, that kind of stuff. And, continue to write bits and bobs about that and hook up with people like Pete Rollins and Barry Taylor and Kester and Moody and people like that. So, yeah. Who knows where we can go from there, but that's a little kind of a bit of a backstory. For my, to try and earn a bit of cash, I teach mathematics at what you'd probably call high school, I guess. So yeah, that's what I do day to day. And in fact, I really like the fact that I have a day job. I don't do preaching for money.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Definitely.
Yeah, I get it, man. I was in the same boat for quite a while until I stopped doing the pastor thing. I never got paid for it. It was for fun.
Yeah, and I think I kind of, there's a lot of people who I really feel for them because they've invested very, very heavily into being pastors, and they've got the house, they've got the healthcare plan, if it's your side of the world, and then and all of that stuff, and then they're like, hey. What do I do if I don't believe this anymore? And, how do I then support my family? How do I then do any kind of life at all? Because there's no other skills there. So I think it's a really, really significant issue. But yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is something that I'm always fascinated with, which is anyone who grows up in the church, whether they have a parent who's on leadership or is an actual pastor or whatever the case may be. I've always felt personally, my dad is still a pastor and was a pastor since I was very young.
Mine is too.
So what I've always felt, at least personally, and at least with the small core group of friends that I have who are also as we call them PKs or pastors' kids.
Yeah.
I almost felt like there was a different kind of unique journey, faith journey that we go on. In the way that I felt like, at least for me anyway, by the time I got to university, I think that was probably the time period where I started to try to ask questions and differentiate between what my parents believed and what I believed personally. And felt like I had a very hard time doing that initially. Was that the case for you as well?
Yeah, I think the thing is, because you're on the inside, you probably begin to have to ask those more difficult questions sooner. Partly because, if it's your dad, like it was with me and with you, you're living with the person, like they don't get to say, oh, do as I say, but not as I do, because you get to see what they do. I mean, if they're not practicing what they're preaching, then you get to see that pretty damn straight away, So, and I think there's that real kind of closeness to it that's so important, and a kind of intensity that means that you begin to interrogate that. In terms of that relationship being, kind of a core family dynamic too. So there's definitely an intensity there, which is, I think kind of core to that experience. And that can be a really good thing. It can be a really, really tough thing. And I know that certainly in the life of my family and in the lives of a very, very significant number of pastor families that I know of, that's been a really, really tough thing for lots of reasons, yeah. Partly to do with this idea of, this kind of myth of perfectionism and the kind of, that kind of stuff. Because, obviously you are their kid, but in fact, if they're working for God and God says there's a meeting every night of the week, like, who are you to argue? Like you want to see your dad and kick a ball in the garden, but I'm sorry, but God is a bit more important than me. So,
right.
Yeah, it's that kind of tricky thing of, can the pastor be a family man, and all those passages about giving up family and stuff become pretty real actually for those kids and for spouses and all the rest of it.
Where will I sleep tonight? Where will I sleep tonight? Pour myself some tea and
So, in the book that we'd like to, talk with you a little bit about, your newest book, Getting High. It's so much here, and it's also a very personal book.
It is, and you know what? That it didn't begin that way. And weirdly, like most of the books I've written, I've started. I mean, I generally write just because I get interested in something. I'm not trying to do something because other people might be interested. I just kind of write because I'm interested in it, and like, hey, may as well share
best reason to do it. Best reason to do it.
So I'd written a book about the history of the human yearning for flight, and I sent it to an agent, and she was like, "Hey, this is great." She said, "But you know what? There's a story here which is I feel like is underneath that you're not quite telling, and that's your story." And I was like, "Oh, damn it!" I just got busted because she was quite right. And I thought, well, actually, two things. Like the only way I can honestly tell this story is to put something of myself in there. But then I'd become a bit concerned, like that the radical theology thing, which I've been a part of, had kind of just become a little bit, too ethereal, and it's all kind of Hegel this and Deleuze that and stuff. I was like, where's the personal stories in that? Like, where does this actually drill down into who the person is, rather than a kind of cloaking of the person behind all the terminology and all the rest of it? And for me, like I'm just interested in stories in a really, really big way. I love fiction. I love Shakespeare. And I was like, okay, I think it's right. It's kind of like people deserve to know where this stuff has come from. For me, not wanting to pretend to tell anyone else's story, but for my story, and so it's really, really important to do that, to make this book a book which probably communicates my theological thinking probably more clearly than anything else I've written, but also tries to communicate something of the story behind that, which I hope it gets to. Yeah.
I would love to see the reaction on somebody's face when they, first get a look at the book and the cover, and it's got the rocket, and, getting high, a savage journey into the heart of the dream of flight. And, I can think of like some aspiring young pilot, being like, oh yeah, this is going to be really good. And then, they tear it open and it's all about psychedelia and transcendence and Apollo and radical theology. And it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? But, you take all these really abstract, like seemingly disparate concepts, and you cut to the heart of something that is very, very true about humanity. And woven throughout that, you've got your own story. And, before we kind of start getting into some of the fun, nerdy stuff about the book, part of your journey interwoven here, I think that I'd love to have you just kind of tease out a little bit is how your faith kind of changed and evolved.
Yeah, I mean, so I begin the book telling, of it. Like, I hope you'll understand that, like, the book is true. So I begin the book by telling the story of my 6th birthday party, where I was taken to see the first Star Wars movie. This is like back in the mid-late 70s. And honestly, this is a guy growing up in the kind of North Midlands of England in a coal mining village. So there's a lot about being underground there. And I'd never been on a plane. I'd never even really seen planes. I'd never been to an airport or anything. So the highest thing in the village we know was the church, and it was the church tower. I mean, that was it. So what Star Wars did for me was kind of open up the ceiling, really, and give me a sense of, whoa, there is a much higher sky than I'd imagined. And that kind of came at exactly the time when, kind of personally within my family, it became clear that I kind of needed probably to lift away from a few things. Basically, my sister had become very, very ill, and it kind of chucked a grenade into the middle of our family situation. And yet, the means of altitude that was offered was just very straightforward. It's like, well, Jesus will lift us away, and we'll go to heaven.
Yep.
So these kind of vectors of lift were what my religious experience were really about. And I kind of tie that into the whole draw towards the charismatic stuff, to the whole kind of ecstatic experience. And really, this kind of ancient root within religion of lifting us away from an impure earth up towards a kind of reunity with a pure heaven. And of course, in Christian terms, what we call the thing that separated us from that initially is the fall. Like, it's kind of gravity. It's kind of pulling us down into the earth. So, these kind of vector notions of religion were really, really key to my understanding. And I think kind of latterly, it was the kind of idea of the incarnation of this return to earth, which was just super important, that actually it is that return down to earth that just becomes so, so vital. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the book is kind of slightly crazy in that it draws in and tries to tie together the psychedelic movement, the Apollo space missions, kind of the birth of the internet, and the kind of long history of why humans have wanted to fly, which I think is a really, really ancient thing. And for me personally, why I wanted to escape as well. Like, and religion has generally been the technology with which we do that. We use it as a technology to lift off and to try and raise ourselves into a pure place again. Yeah.
What I think is really interesting about your personal journey is that it sounds like you were kind of born and raised in more of like what we would call like a traditional, I think you said Church of England. And then kind of encountered this extremely charismatic evangelical movement later on, which was very much my situation as well.
Totally.
Was not born and raised in the evangelical movement, encountered it while I was in college. And I remember, this kind of made me remember a paper I wrote in college where I broke down kind of the format of an evangelical service that I had encountered. And I thought even the music is kind of designed in such a way that it kind of has this emotional climax at the end.
Yep.
And so all of the congregants are kind of in this fever pitch by the ending.
Absolutely.
And I remember my dad asking me this question. He said, well, what happens after the service is over? What are you left with? And he goes, if you can say that you're left with something, that you're holding on to something real, then great. Yeah. But if not, then what was the point? And it sounds like you kind of ran into a similar situation when kind of life situations, like the situation with your sister becoming ill, kind of crashed into this life of faith that you had at this point. And it sounds like you kind of had some issues, and it kind of started to unravel a little. So at what point? I think I remember you saying that even after your sister started to get better, you still felt as if something wasn't quite right. So at what point, did you realize like something, I'm going to have to move in some direction? What did that look like though?
I guess when some friends and I started this thing, Vox, it was essentially a deconstruction. And that's why it's kind of, great to talk to you guys in terms of name and everything, because, that's what we were doing. We were saying, look, we're not going to burn it down, but we're going to take things apart piece by piece and look at the stuff that's there and see if we want to build again, and see how we might build again. And when you start to deconstruct, you're like, oh, okay, this is like super interesting, how all these pieces kind of come apart and what are we actually left with there. Now, the courage to do that, it does take a lot of courage, because what you're deconstructing isn't just kind of some little Sunday experience. It's the whole thing. And this is what really interests me about the kind of radical theology movement, is that if it only deconstructs this kind of experience of, a Christian thing on a Sunday, then it's completely failed.
Yeah.
If it doesn't also have an impact on deconstructing how, this kind of evangelical theology fits in with economics and with politics and all the rest of it, then it's completely failed. Like, it's almost like letting a virus go, and it works on one part of your life, and then it begins to work on the rest as well. So I suppose the moment really was, setting up this thing, Vox, and then through that, doing that exploration. But one of the key things for me is when the guy I set up Vox with very suddenly was diagnosed with a chronic cancer, and he died 10 months later. He was age 45.
Man, wow.
Now that's like the real deal.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we can talk this, we can talk that, and we're kind of, not exactly young, but not exactly old. And then it's like, oh, okay, so let's talk about death. And, this was an enormous privilege, spending 10 months, talking with my best friend about, okay, he is going to die. So what do we do? Do we go running back and start praying again? Do we start asking for healing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And it's like, okay, you've got to really stare this thing down, and you've really got to work this out, because, are you actually going to have the courage of your theology here? And my God, like, he did, and he was a son of a pastor, just like me, a super smart guy, very thoughtful. And he was incredibly gracious. Like, if people wanted to pray for him, he wasn't going to be like, oh, man, bugger off, whatever. There's no kind of fun. But was very, very clear. Like, okay, this is it. I think he's quoting, he was quoting someone else, but this phrase that he reminded me of, which I talk about in the book, which was, each one of us at the table knows that one day we'll be part of the meal. And I just absolutely loved that. It's like we feel that we're in this position of great privilege of being, here and cognizant of the rest of it. But you know what? Our atoms will dissolve away, and they will eventually become part of the meal. Like, so that was a massive, like, thing for me. And in the aftermath of that, I had a chance to interview the philosopher Simon Critchley, who I was a big fan of already. I think he's written some great books, and some great books of theology, actually. But it was very soon after Nick's death, my friend's death. And I said to him, hey, come on, like, what do you think? Do you believe in the afterlife? And he goes, yeah, I believe in the life of those who come after.
Yeah.
In other words, look, we walk towards death hoping that we have lived a life in such a way that those who come after us will be able to get up from the grave and walk away and feel that they are stronger and better and more able to live good lives because of the example we've given. Now that for me is a solid Christian faith that I will have, that doesn't need to be transcendent. I'm not interested in ideas of necessary resurrection or any of that. It's that idea of us being ready for the afterlife, the life of those who will come after us. And that has an environmental impact. It's got an economic impact. It's all of these things. A parenting impact for those who have children, and so on.
Man, that's really, really good. I was wondering, actually, because I've realized we've used a term not only on this episode but several times in the podcast, and I don't think we've ever really gotten a chance to give some listeners that maybe aren't familiar an overview of what we mean when we say radical theology. Could you just give like a quick kind of like, what do you mean by that? Couple thoughts on like what, when we say radical theology and people are like, what are you talking about?
Oh, it's just the same old bullshit with a new name, mate. Don't worry about
it. Right. It's a catchy title.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. That's a really tricky one. Like,
I know, man. I'm sorry to do that to you.
No, but I want to answer. I think it's a fantastic question. Because again, like I have a kind of complex relationship with the term. It's difficult because what the hell does it mean? I mean, who the hell knows what it means?
That's how we feel about deconstruction.
I think, yeah, it's a term that's been used for those who've become interested in a deconstruction, particularly of a theology that is around transcendence. It's those who, want to kind of look for a, radical, a kind of different route, as it were. So one that's definitely critiquing, evangelicalism in that way and the kind of charismatic side, but also, I think, the kind of mythic elements of those in the high church and all the rest of it. So it's an idea of exploring theology of incarnation that's not about, needing that transcendent element. However, I think it's not. It would be kind of crazy to say that it's radical. It's kind of disappointing to see that over the number of years where I've kind of hung around people on that actually that radical edge is just, it'll be fallacious to call it radical, really. I think it's too often backed itself into a cul-de-sac and become overly concerned with counting the number of non-existent angels on the head of pins. It's like and actually the problem is that by focusing on that, it's another way of avoiding the real issue, which is like, holy shit, what am I actually going to do if I really do radically change my beliefs?
Yeah.
So there's a lot in the kind of original radical theology stuff about engaging in doubt and like, I'm not sure, and I kind of express a theology of doubt, and it's like, okay, but there's only a certain amount of time where you can do that, and it's a helpful thing to do,
right?
Because you know what, it actually then becomes a way of sustaining your old beliefs by just saying, I'm not sure if I believe them anymore, and it's a way of avoiding having to take genuine decisions and to confront difficult issues.
Yeah, it becomes a new defense mechanism, like other dogmas.
Exactly. Yeah. So this kind of idea of being kind of whatever about your beliefs then itself becomes a way of avoiding critiquing your beliefs. It's like, this is bullshit.
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally get what you're saying.
I've tried to bring that to the table, and it doesn't always go down too well. I mean, it's kind of interesting that there's been certain fetishized objects within the kind of radical theology thing too. Like there's a whole kind of big thing about alcohol, and so you get your kind of obsession with craft beer or with certain spirits or even with like coffee or whatever. It's like, guys, do you not see you're just replacing an obsession with one fetishized divine object with a different one? I mean, like, come on, and I just find that really interesting that there's very often a certain way that people are prepared to go in terms of deconstruction before it genuinely just becomes too uncomfortable, and people don't want to know. They don't want to know.
It's like,
so I'm all for like, where's the new generation?
I think we've heard Pete Rollins say before, like, a lot of times when he sees people go through these shifts or these movements, they maintain the same texture throughout. Like, they jump from one fundamentalism to a new fundamentalism.
Mm-hmm.
New terminology, new, totem and taboo, but but it's the same thing.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's a risk with the work he's doing too, is, okay, how do you try and stop that happening, in terms of people just kind of consuming his product in that way, and using that as a way of avoiding genuine engagement with issues. Yeah,
because that's where it gets scary, when you don't have a proxy to go in front of you anymore.
Absolutely. That is where it gets terrifying.
But that's so good. That's the good stuff.
Well, yeah, that's what I think. But
naked on the front lines.
Yeah, get naked on the front line. I'm all for that.
That's going to be our lead-in quote when we like tease this episode.
Yeah.
May even be the title of the episode,
with some good 70s like bass line music playing in the background.
Yeah.
No, we
I
get.
prefer provide pictures. I can provide pictures.
We got to do some. We got to do some. We got to do some Beatles for Kester.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we'd have to pay out the nose for that one.
We don't have permission. We don't have permission to do that.
If I could only get in touch with Paul McCartney, I just
John,
No, he's a
you
good
could
friend.
just
Yeah,
sing it
he'll-
a cappella,
he'll-
John.
yeah. Oh man.
Oh,
Well,
good stuff.
I think this is actually a perfect lead into what your book's about, and
Yeah.
I think this would be a good time for you to really kind of lay the groundwork for our listeners. Like, I love this comparison that you make between, our pursuit of all things escapist, and so whether it's drugs or technology, specifically, I love the way you pull technology in because I wholeheartedly agree.
Oh yeah.
But even you come around to religion and how all of these things, although in and of themselves are fairly neutral, they can be used in a way that kind of reflects the way a lot of people live their lives, which is to avoid pain at all costs,
Yep.
avoid our issues, and as you say, kind of try to fly away from them.
Yep.
So I wondered if you could just kind of lay the groundwork for kind of how you make this comparison in your book.
Well, I mean, I try and start right at the beginning of what we might term technology, I suppose, with like the gift of fire. And there's some kind of lovely ideas in really ancient texts about people observing fire and how this kind of light would lift up and try and almost make its way back up towards the big lights that people could see in the sky, So there's a very ancient sense of altitude being something about being drawn to the light. And clearly, when people die, what happens is they fall to the ground. So like the earth is bad, up there in the heavens, maybe it's a lot better. And, around the 17th century and even 16th century or earlier, you've got this idea that the moon is perhaps where the Garden of Eden is. And why wouldn't it be? Because it's pure white and it doesn't fall. Like it just sits up there in the sky. So it must be made of higher stuff. So there's this kind of idea that if only we could achieve flight, we could overcome our fall. Now, if you look at the pursuit of that technologically, that is very, very much right from the word go tied in intimately with religious ideas as well. And it begins with, in fact, a prohibition on human flight. Like people begin to imagine it can happen, but then in the kind of art of the early Renaissance, you're like, oh, no, you can't do that. To fly would be to kind of, press into God's particular area, and we shouldn't do that. So if you look at the kind of Babel story there,
Right.
You've got this Babel myth of people uniting together, a common language, and building this tower, and God kind of like smashes it all down. So there's no way, that would be bad. So there's a real kind of prescription on flight. Now, it's only as the Renaissance begins to develop that flight becomes A, more possible, and B, people begin to question the idea of whether this religious prohibition on flight is actually true. So when you come to the very first human flight in the Montgolfier balloon, which is an extraordinary piece of technology, you've also got the whole kind of politics and religion around it, whereby what's happened is that people have had to give themselves religious permission to be able to experience this technology of flight. And there's this kind of weird flip in that when the first flights occur, it's not that we are impure things, sullying this wonderful divine God. It's that as we rise up into the skies, we become more pure. And all of the early literature on flight tells us that. It's like, it's amazing. It's this place of beauty and grace and stillness, and we all become pure. And actually, we then get a divine perspective on the world below, which makes us a little bit more like God.
Yep.
So you have this really kind of extraordinary thing that as we fly higher and higher, people are beginning to see that there is still this religious dimension to it. And my God, you've only got to play any of the tapes of the NASA Apollo missions. I mean, they're absolutely jam-packed full of people reading out psalms and breaking bread on the moon and talking about, this kind of divine perspective, but very much from a kind of power perspective too, of being able to look down on other human beings and see them from that divine point of view. Now, what I try and do in the book is to say, well, actually, if you look at the history of psychedelic drugs, it's doing exactly the same thing. And this, of course, is, intimately tied in with the history of religion. I mean, you can't really tell the story of ancient religion without telling the story of the herbs and preparations and special substances that have been used to kind of lift people into divine ecstasy. It's just absolutely jam-packed full. Now, of course, LSD, which is invented during the Second World War, but comes to prominence in the 50s and 60s, is this kind of turbocharged convenience store entheogen. It can kind of generate images of God within it. And this ties in perfectly with the kind of new turbocharged rocket technology, which is taking us up into space.
It's amazing.
Which also ties in perfectly with a brand new charismatic evangelicalism, which is, rather than spending six years as a monk, like ping, lift your hands, speaking in tongues, and you can reach this place of great spiritual height, all in one go. Now, that comes, of course, out of the Black Pentecostalism. And of course, here you're dealing politically with a group of people who've been so oppressed that they don't have anywhere else to go. The only move they can make is the vertical one. So it's no surprise that in a kind of oppressed Black Pentecostal church, you see people moving into that ecstatic mode. And what I try and argue in the book is that actually there are these modes of oppression which other people are feeling too, not the same as the oppression of ethnic minorities, but in terms of feeling, the kind of Cold War, the kind of changes in society that happened after World War II, and people are feeling like, oh my God, the encroaching of consumer capitalism, I've got nowhere to go. So bang, we just lift off into the sky. Like, let's get out of here. And the hippies do it, and the scientists do it with the space missions, and the religious people do it too. And all of them pretty much fail. But out of the ashes of all of that comes, this new high, which is high technology, which is now, is there a way of lifting ourselves up into perfection, which we can do using the little communion digital thin wafers of silicon. And that really is I think, what's behind so much of this technological move. And it's really, in the book, I tell the story of like the birth of the internet and how that happens and how it was about trying to achieve a more perfect human being, a more perfect human memory. And of course, with all these things, with Google search and all these things, and with Skype and video calling, we can be omniscient pretty much. We can be omnipresent. We can mediate our presence into other places. So we're becoming like angelic through this technology. It turns us into angels. So I try and tie those things together and say, technologically and religiously, those things are basically the same thing. Like the technology of religion is the same as the religion of technology.
Indeed, you are listening. Why don't you raise your hand? Show me what you're feeling. Show me how you feel. I'm drowning in this country, trying to get to the promised land.
I love this. This is so interesting. So we've got, the Apollo mission. We've got, LSD, psychedelia. We've got, Pentecostal charismatic, evangelicalism. We've got technology and the internet. All of these things going for this escape, this transcendence. Yeah. And you kind of touched on this, but I'd like to draw it out a little bit because I think this is like a great point for meditation and reflection. Is why do we want to escape so bad? Like we touched on the fall. We touched on a little bit of the world's going to hell, encroaching capitalism, things like that. But let's talk a little bit about that. What is starting to happen? And, you kind of talk through the book about how, this dream of flight and these kinds of things in our consciousness have been there all along. So
I think,
what is this? What's going on here?
I think there are two things going on. One of which is like the kind of conscious projection or the kind of the story that gets told by the priests, by, Steve Jobs, bless him, by everyone. It is that what this technology can do, what this religion can do, is lift you out of trouble, oppression, and pain, out of mortality into perfection, into becoming whole again. But actually, behind that, what's actually going on is that there is a system which is itself trying to become more divine. So the promise is that we will become gods, and the promise is made but not delivered on. And what happens instead is that there is a system which itself becomes more powerful and more divine. I mean, and we upload all our data to Google. I mean, Google knows all the numbers of the hairs on your head. It knows all your movements. It knows all this stuff. That is a system that is becoming functionally divine. But the promise is that we will become that. We will know all things. We will be able to extend our lives. We will become kind of more perfect in that way. So I think there are kind of two interesting things going on in that. There is the ancient promise that we will become like God. And, you can read that back in Genesis. I mean, that's right there.
Yeah.
Of course,
That's the
the
diabolical promise, right?
Yeah. Eat the apple. Ha ha ha. Great name for a company. Great name for a thing. And you will become like God. You will know. You will have all knowledge. But what's happening is like the opposite, is that there is another system which feeds off that and becomes more powerful. So we have to be really careful about wherever we see that promise. And this is what I think is so powerful about the kind of radical Christian narrative, is that what it offers us is a means of tearing that divine promise down. Like, the crucifixion is a way of putting those gods to death and saying, no, we focus on loving one another. That's what it boils down to. And then we resist that temptation to try to ascend, to try to become more divine, by which we mean more powerful. So it's really, there is this ancient human desire to, you could say, become like God, but more poignantly, to become gods. And if you look back in the kind of ancient kind of Greek stuff of kind of Plato and how that's taken on the Renaissance, there are people who genuinely believe that with the perfection of human memory and human intellect, we can become divine. And that is exactly what the dream of the artificial intelligence singularity community is that in knowing all things and in uploading our consciousness to the cloud, another great theological named product, this kind of cloud above, we will become basically divine and immortal. The problem I have with that is that it's bullshit, and actually there'll be some company that's going to become more powerful.
Spiritual force that don't need no rules to make it worthless.
Yeah, it as I was listening to you talk, the one thing that kept sticking out to me is it sounds like the system, as you call it, is almost this capitalistic machine that is trying to convince us of, that we're missing something, or that there's a lack, and that it can sell us something that will fill that void.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that's just totally fundamental to all of that. And it is that idea of trying to sell us something that will elevate us. It will take us a little bit higher, So we'll live a little bit, and a bigger house, a bit further up the street. We upgrade the whole time. It's all about this vector upwards. And actually, it's a lie. It's a lie. And I end the book by asking for a plea of returning to the earth. And I think we're already seeing that. Like, clearly, environmentally, we have to be serious about the earth rather than focusing on accessing heaven.
Yeah. It almost seems, it occurs to me that it's almost like a cosmic like a little kid in a cosmic bedroom, where mom comes up and says, "Hey, you need to clean your room," and you try to sneak off into the yard and play basketball for a while or something. But like you can sneak off for a while, but ultimately the problem is still there. You still need to clean your room. The mess is not going to go away on its own. And it almost seems like that's what you're saying, but on a much larger scale.
Right.
Yeah, but there's still this myth that somehow we can go and colonize other planets. And you see this in the kind of interstellar film narrative where basically people have totally screwed up the Earth.
Yeah.
So let's get, a group of people together and we'll go and colonize some other planet and restart humanity. And it's like, how many kind of sub-Saharan Africans are you going to put on that mission? Like how many people who are poor, who are gay, who are, do you know what I mean? It's like, how you start humanity? It's going to be a bunch of, well, you see it. I mean, you see it already. Like who's going to be the first space tourist? It's like, $250 million and this, that, and the other. So, and it's such a ridiculous hope anyway. I mean, you would be talking generations and generations and generations of humans traveling towards some star that will it support us? We don't know.
Right.
We've got to look after the home that we have and the planet we have. And I think that's why, radical theology in terms of being serious about politics and economics as well as being serious about theology always has to end up with an environmental, with a kind of political dimension too. And it worries me if that isn't obviously being critiqued in a sensible way. Like, okay, well, why are you still talking about Christianity? There's got to be something wider that you're thinking about here, because it has much, much, much wider implications than just someone's personal faith.
Right. I think, a common thread between somebody else we interviewed, we actually talked about her just before, recently. We were talking to Diana Butler Bass last year, and she was talking about, she's like, all I ever hear, I hear a million sermons on resurrection all the time. Resurrection, resurrection, die and go to heaven, resurrection, blah, 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 blah. She's like, you almost never hear sermons on incarnation. Almost never. Yeah. And there's the chord of, what you're talking about, like, in Christianity, this coming down, this embodying, this owning, this sensing the connection, the unity, the unification. There seems to be a lot of material, in the Christian tradition that speaks to that and gives gravity, to use the term intentionally, gives gravity, a lot of gravity, theologically, to I absolutely think that. And I think, this idea of being serious about, this mechanism of how do we put our gods to death? And, what do we mean by God? Well, I mean, any system which we offer worship to, which takes us away from caring about one another. Yeah.
And, you can look back, like the classic examples, the guy who's like, hey, it's not like I want to send you to the gulag, but the system says I have to,
Yeah.
And
it's not me, it's the system. It's not me.
Yeah, it's not me, it's the system, So, and for most people, the God that they serve, they don't even particularly name. But, if you look at the kind of way that people labor and the way that they offer their labor for a kind of, not exactly a fantastic return, but they keep on doing it, even though their family suffers, even though they don't see their kids, all of this stuff. It's whoa. There's a hell of a lot of worship going on there of some system which we, are offering our devotion to. So it's about how does that kind of crucifixion virus work in those ways as well? Like, how does it help us to bring those things to a point of death, in order that we can live a better life afterwards? Like, how does it help us to destroy all of the gods that are in existence in our lives? And people say to me, "What you don't believe in God anymore?" I'm like, no, the opposite. I think there are gods everywhere. There are systems that people are serving
That's the problem.
that they don't even know of. There's so many gods everywhere, and we've got to put them all to death. So it's
No, and
Christianity.
I get what
the
you're
best way
saying.
of doing it.
Yeah, like even the Christian God, like, one of the most, and that's always going to make people mad. I was talking to I think it was my mom recently about like, even the Christian idea of God. She's like, "What do you mean? Like, are you kidding me?" And I was like, "No, listen to me. Like, I think Jesus actually said this." And she's like,
Yeah.
"Well, what are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, at the end when, he's giving this kind of, apocalyptic look at, his return, or like how it's going to be later, the end times and the judgment or whatever. There's going to be all these people running around using the name Jesus, Lord, Lord, oh, we did all this stuff. We were working miracles. We were preaching. We were, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "I have no idea who you are." Well, who are the people that did know Jesus? Oh, the people that were visiting the people in prison, that were, clothing the naked, that were, giving water to the thirsty and feeding the hungry. And, but, you were doing that to me. That's where I was. And they're like, "We didn't know that was you." And he's like, "Exactly." And there's a death of God idea in that parable.
Yeah.
That I just think is so brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah,
Man.
totally agree. Yeah. But people don't want to do it. They don't want to do it, and I just think that's just so interesting. I mean, the work that I've been really, really supportive of is the work that Tad DeLay is doing.
Yeah.
Which is, it's incredible. This book that he wrote that basically predicts that a character like Trump will come along, and it predicts all of the things that the evangelical community will do, in terms of supporting something which is so inherently wrong and immoral, and yet can be justified because of, these particular tiny little things. It's extraordinary.
Oh, he is the ultimate priest for capitalism.
Yeah.
He's a wonderful priest.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he really is.
Yeah, wonderful priest. And that book is great too. You're talking about Cynic and the Fool?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
He's actually we recently interviewed him about his new book. He'll be out.
Oh, great.
Just a couple weeks before this episode will air, so it'll be a nice compliment for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought a lot I was actually wondering if you guys might have been friends, because it seems the common chord between you two is not so much about belief, using air quotes belief, but like how belief functions.
Yes, absolutely.
Love that. We should all be asking those questions.
Exactly. We should be, and and it works exactly the same way politically in the UK as well. It's quite clearly Brexit is a religious phenomenon. I totally believe that.
Tell us what you mean by that. Elaborate just a little bit.
Well, there's no possible way of engaging someone rationally about it. It's a pure ideology. So you can't change anyone's mind. And there are ways of. So basically, if you make a point, whatever, then it's just, you're a heretic, or
right,
or some other way of putting you down on that. And they would rather destroy everything than admit that anything was wrong. And you kind of get that sense, like people would rather that the US was torn to pieces in every possible way than to admit that maybe they were wrong on some small aspect, whatever.
Yeah,
right.
And you see that now in the UK. It's like, well, it would be better if we paid £600 million a week rather than actually just admit that, maybe we got it a bit wrong. So it really is functioning in a highly religious way, and it's how that belief functions and how it is possible to even begin thinking about changing that.
It's interesting because I thought of a quote by our mutual friend Pete Rollins when he said, I believe he's the one that said this anyway. He said, if you want to know what somebody believes, look at what they do.
Yeah.
And he gives the example of, like I'll tell people, I don't want little kids making shirts that I wear, but yet I wear this shirt and I know in the back of my mind that there's a possibility that it was made in sweatshops and, somewhere across the world. And I think that's truly reflective in specifically right now in the way that we vote, especially in the United States. It's, it's such a weird paradox. It's we say we preach one thing out of one side of our mouths, and then we vote seemingly the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is just, it's exactly it. And it's how we begin to deal with that system that is just so fascinating, just absolutely fascinating. Like, how the hell are we going to get out of this mess?
Yeah. How do we? It's
how do we indeed?
What's the first step in the right direction? We've been asking ourselves that for the better part of the year.
Like, clearly, it's buying my book, but beyond that,
yes.
And that book is Getting High: A Savage Journey into the Heart of the Dream of Light.
Which, by the way, if people didn't know better and they just looked at the titles of your books without looking at the cover art, they'd be like, "This guy wrote a book about drugs and pirates." So So I feel like we should give some context. This is not a book necessarily about drugs or about specifically pirates.
It's kind of hilarious being a school teacher where kids come in and they're like, "Hey, I looked you up," and like, "What?"
Like there is a spaceship on the front of this book, so
Yeah, which is an image I just totally love. I love pirates. I love spaceships. I'm not going to say I love drugs, but but it's all endlessly fascinating in it, and it's all stuff that we should be looking at. I do think that there is theology everywhere, and I kind of do enjoy thinking, okay, well, is there something in this pirate stuff? Is there something in space travel? There's something there that actually can help us to think in a theological way, I suppose. Yeah, it's all there.
Yeah, I think that having an unbelievable respect for humanity in all of its weirdness, in all of its significance. I think I heard you say on an interview, or maybe it was in the book, I can't remember now. You were talking about how we have this consciousness, and we're aware that we're aware, and we're almost like blown away by it. Like, what do we do with this now? Like, this is absolutely incredible.
And I think that is probably the greatest issue that humans have faced, is that in becoming conscious, we want to find some way of explaining how we became conscious.
Right.
And the easiest thing to do is to say, well, someone made us conscious.
Yep.
Because that would devolve us of some responsibility for being conscious, because it wasn't our fault. It happened to us. And it is an extraordinary miracle. Like, our consciousness is completely incredible. But actually, the hardest thing we can do is to say, well, what if we are just conscious and yet it's just us, and we've got to take responsibility for one another.
Yes.
That's a really remarkable thing to have to do. And, how does that help us then to think about caring for each other? And, the other thing I say in the book is the universe doesn't care. The universe doesn't care. The only ones who can do that is us. We're the only ones who can do that. And I think that understanding that the universe does not give a crap about us is something that space travel has helped us to grasp. Is like, it's not like some beautiful caring space out there. Like, we're the ones who are going to care for one another. We're the only ones who can do that.
Yeah. What a wonderful privilege. Yes,
absolutely. What a wonderful privilege, and what a shame to kind of throw that away. By pretending that it might be otherwise, or saying, throwing the responsibility onto something else. Absolutely the best privilege.
I think that's a wonderful thought to leave our listeners with. I think we could go all day long, but
all night long.
Oh, wait, John's signaling me. He's got something. Hang on, John's got something.
Yeah, I just want to get because I feel like we need to leave people with a little advice. And one of the things that I was wondering is, obviously our theology, and this is very prevalent, I think, in the United States. What you're saying is this very, we like to categorize. We like to think of things in very dualistic terms. It's right or it's wrong. It's black or it's white. You're Republican or you're a Democrat. That sort of thing. And so I think it's reflected in our theology as well. And we're right along with you in terms of this whole escape plan theology. It's, if we believe the right things and we check all the right boxes and we have perfect attendance and we donate to, some good charity, then we're going to get into heaven and we're going to leave all the sinners and all the crap behind. And so we don't have to clean up the mess,
Yes.
And so, like I said earlier, I think any of these things that we kind of grab onto as kind of our vices or our golden calves, as it were, whether it's technology or Adam and I were talking about your book before we started recording, it could be alcohol, anything that you could use to escape.
Yeah.
But obviously those things aren't inherently bad or evil or even have that intended purpose. So is there a balance that we can strike where religion can be a good, positive thing, where, flight can be a positive, good thing, where technology can be a positive, good thing? Is there a balance? Have you found a balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have celebrated Martin Luther King Day recently. Is that right?
Yes, we
Yes.
And I think he is that perfect balance in that. He said, "I've been to the mountaintop." Now, what that does is when you achieve that level of moderate altitude, call it a mountaintop, you do get perspective on what is below. But the issue is not then to lift away from the mountaintop and to disappear into heaven. The issue is then to come down from the mountain, having gained that perspective, and begin to work to put it right. And that, I think, is the key to it, is to say, look, flight's not bad. Flight's a wonderful thing. It's completely incredible. But we don't lift off in order to then disappear. We lift off in order to get perspective, to be able to then come back down. And that, for me, I think is exactly the right thing to be doing. And in a sense, we could talk again about the place of religion within that, in that the religious space, I'm not saying it's a bad or a wrong space, but what can be beautiful about that space is that it gives us an opportunity to reflect, not that we then go into escape mode, but in order that we can then return and do what we can back on the ground. And that, for me, is the place that we need to be at.
So the air time maximizes the potential of the ground time.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And sometimes we need that in order to be able to gain that perspective. But the temptation, of course, just as with the hippies and the LSD lot found, is, you want to stay high the whole time. And in fact, it becomes an escape rather than a means of understanding better and giving ourselves energy to help, whether that is with the peace movement or whatever it was.
Oh man, that's good.
That is so good.
That reminds me. Oh, go ahead.
It's been great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, you too. We have to end there, I think.
Yeah, that went by so fast. I just looked up at the clock and I was like, what?
Oh man.
Oh, dang it.
So before we let you go to bed, because we know it's super late in the UK right now, we want people to go out and obviously find your work and keep on top of what you're getting into these days. So what's the best place to find your book? What's the best place to connect with you online and that sort of thing?
So, yeah, I'm on Twitter occasionally, at Kester Brewin, and you can get the books in all good local bookstores. They can order them in. There are certain jungle-based online retailers that stock them too. So the latest book is called Getting High, and then there's a book on pirates called Mutiny, and so on. I've also done a couple of TED Talks for those people who are interested in that stuff. Actually, right now, a few months ago, I won a couple of grants. So from the Arts Council in the UK and Society of Authors to work on some fiction. So I'm writing a novel at the moment. So
Do it, Kester.
That's awesome.
Do it, Kester. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's the plan. Is my real heart is in telling stories like that. So
it's going to be plan is about astronaut, pirate, priests that take LSD.
It's about a boy wizard with a scar. I don't think it's been done before.
I'm in it. I think there's money to be made.
I'd read it. I'd read another one. I'd read another one.
Love it. Well, hey, thank you so much. This has been a long time coming, and we appreciate your flexibility and the fact that we finally got to make it happen. And
it's been great.
We so appreciate it.
Oh, so much fun, Kester. Thank you so much. Gave us a lot to think about.
Cheers, man. Take care.
You too, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Music, all they got is overpriced education, and they won't get paid to use it. And I know you all get high, but your little brothers and your little
Every time we do this, I look forward to debriefing because I'm like, we couldn't have planned that we would talk about all those things.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy wasn't even on our radar until Pete Rollins was like, hey, you guys should talk to Kester Brewin.
Yeah.
Like, okay, then, we played tag with him for a while.
Yeah.
And finally get his book. We finally read through it and we're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of resonance here.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that he's able to tie it into just our sense of escapism or our desire to escape. And like, we really do have this addiction to avoiding pain, avoiding suffering, avoiding hardships, and like really just distraction in general.
Oh my gosh.
Like it made me, I thought of it again the other day. I was watching something with my daughter, and there was I feel like it was a preview to another cartoon movie or something. And they were just like these kids wandering around on their iPhones and just ran into each other, because.
So funny.
Yeah, I'm cracking up and she has no idea why. But I'm like, we really have this crazy addiction, whether it's technology or as Kester says, drugs or thrill seeking, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a good friend of the podcast out in Portland, our buddy Derek Abert.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I was just talking to him. He's writing this really cool piece based on Ready Player One, and he's taken this whole spin about all of these futuristic sci-fi stories, like Blade Runner and Ready Player One, Matrix, and all these kinds of things, as this vehicle for contemplating the idea of how much we all want to escape.
Yeah.
So have you watched, we haven't talked about this, but have you watched the new Netflix series, Altered Carbon?
No, not yet.
Okay, so it's again, super futuristic, kind of dystopia, like in the super far off future, and just the avenues for escape. If there's any one thing all of these sci-fi writers agree on, is the ability for us to continue to use things to escape, whether it's virtual reality, the internet, just technology in general, is offering us this endless black hole labyrinth of ways to escape in any way we want.
Yeah.
It is, forget NASA, forget drugs. Technology is going next level every single day. It's exponentially giving us more ways to just completely not be here. So Derek and I were talking about how, and it fits right into this conversation we just had with Kester. Derek and I were talking about how, oh my gosh, no wonder we want to escape. Life is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And being here and actually struggling through it and facing what's inside of us, my fears, my doubts, my insecurities, my wife, my kids, my mortgage, my job, my church, I constantly feel like I'm being judged. I constantly feel like I'm not up to the task.
Right.
That's what reality does to you. It says, you're really not ready for this. You're not ready to be alive. It's what reality screams at you.
Yeah.
So you want to escape.
Yeah.
You want a manicured, customized reality that you are in control of. And it's so everywhere. Engaging in life and actually being present, so hard.
Yeah. It makes you think about the evolution of society, who goes from looking at those magazines, the garbage magazines you see, when you're in line at the grocery store.
Right.
And just kind of losing yourself in celebrity culture and oh, they've got it all so put together, never mind the fact that they're completely airbrushed and maybe their marriage is falling apart or whatever, but they seem like they have it all. They have riches. They're driving the best cars, like going to the best vacation spots, whatever, just living the dream, to like, you know, the advent of reality TV and like doing the same thing, escaping your crappy life through vicariously through theirs to the next evolution, which would be to literally like virtually live that through virtual technology and like to live the life of your dreams. And why would you ever unplug yourself, you know, and actually live reality?
Right.
Because we're always looking for that next best thing or what my life should have been, you know, instead of, well, ironically, you know, the guest that we'll have on in a couple weeks, talking about being grateful.
Oh yeah.
Hint, hint, wink, wink.
Hint, hint. So subtle. You're so subtle. I know. But like, you know, the interesting thing to me is looking back after kind of going through like, you know, deconstruction and being a part of this place where you're like, oh man, I really need to look at like what's actually going on here, is how much theology, religion, Christianity, church culture, things like that actually play into the ideas of escape and the ideas of not engaging in the struggle, but finding a way to be in control, finding a way to get everything you want.
Yeah.
Finding a way to be whole and complete and perfect, and you know it's all going to be great. And then you hit a wall and you go, it's not working.
Right.
And that either means that, shoot, I don't really believe. So what does that mean for my eternal destiny?
Right.
Or this is all like a bunch of hooey. You know, it just really sucks. So like, I love how a guy like Kester comes in, very personal. A lot of the stuff in the book was just personal anecdote about stuff that he had experienced as a child, you know, becoming a Christian, going through kind of deconstruction. And I don't think he uses that word. I think he actually does use that word at one point. But anyway, this is where we're all at. If you're listening to this space, figuring out what it means to not escape anymore, not put your fingers in your ears, not bury your head in the sand, but actually take a good look at yourself and what you believe and how that's actually functioning in your life. And that's kind of what we're all about.
Yeah.
Not trying to lead you one way or another, but saying just like, hey, let's put our feet on the ground for a second and actually just take a really good look at like what is actually going on here.
Yeah. Take a deep breath and just listen to the stream, you know, just for a second.
That was very Zen of you.
Thank you. I've been reading a lot of Zen Buddhism lately.
It's good stuff, man.
It is.
It is really good stuff.
Oh, man.
Well, that's really all I got. I mean, they should just check out some other podcasts with Kester, connect to his work, follow him online, get his book, Getting High. Tell him we sent you.
Yeah.
And thank you to all of our people that are supporting us on Patreon.
Yes, big thanks.
For the people that are buying tickets for the Denver show. Every time somebody buys a ticket for the Denver show, John and I text each other and we're like geeked up, not that we sold another ticket, but that there's another friend that we're going to get to like meet and like, oh my gosh, remember this guy? We know him from Twitter, you know?
Yeah.
You know, this is going to be so much fun. Like, we're actually going to get to meet this person. We're actually going to get to hang out and have a conversation and exchange stories.
You're going to get a real hug.
Big hug.
Big hug. Yeah, I think that's the part that I think is the craziest, is the fact that, you know, when you do a podcast like we've been doing for almost 2 years now, like we you know, the closest interaction that we have with many of you is just, you know, through social media or email or whatever. And so a chance and an opportunity to go outside of our own city and actually meet some of you in person is going to be really cool. So
it's going to be so much fun.
We're looking forward to it.
So everybody, if you want to come to Denver, you know what to do. Go to our website, check the show notes.
Oh yeah, I have no clue what band I picked this week.
The music is a surprise.
Check the show notes
because we're a little behind right now, and that's a surprise for you.
Yeah,
it's a little delicious treat.
Yeah,
follow us on Spotify. Oh my gosh, I finally got Spotify.
Yeah,
and I'm actually following us on Spotify right now. And playlists, I have realized, I'm late to the scene.
Yeah,
are the best part about Spotify.
Oh, totally.
I love the playlists, and we have a good one.
We have a great one. We have over 70 songs by 60 some odd different artists, and we add new ones every single episode. So once this episode comes out, there'll be another song by another new band on there, and you can follow us.
Did you like what our buddy Phil Britton tweeted the other day?
That was the coolest thing ever.
When he's like in a coffee shop and he hears a song and he's like, this sounds like something that John from the Deconstructionists would probably add to the show. I was like, oh my gosh, you just made his whole life.
That is like my other fun part of, the work that I try to do for the podcast is try to find. I like to surprise Adam. You guys don't know this, but I like to surprise him because he has no idea.
I have no idea
most of the time what music I'm picking.
I very rarely know what's going on around here.
Right now, there's just behind Adam. You guys can't see it. There's just stacks of books because I'm in the process of moving out of this house and into another, and so the books are just getting piled up and put into boxes at this point.
So many good books back there.
I know.
Such a delightful stack of books. We love you guys. Hope your seasons of Lent, if you're doing that, is going well and all that stuff. Thank you for listening. And we will be back soon with another tasty treat for you. But until then, for now, we are your hosts. I'm Adam Narlock.
And I'm John Williamson.
Keep deconstructing, everybody.
Build a wall, build it 3 miles high. Be my guest, throw your insult. And if you wanna swing a wrecking ball, you might as well try. I'm sure it's very simple. You've got limp wrists, small hands, a sour face, and your hair looks like a turtle. And you're milking your position for all that it's worth, but the milk is gonna curdle. Clap your hands, move your ankles to you fall. Clap your hands, move your ankles to you fall. Clap your hands, move your ankles to you fall. Rock and roll, save our souls. Rock and roll, rock and roll. Rock and roll, save our souls. Rock and roll, rock and roll. Well, the party is raging and the machine is warm with the pride of the deceiver. And the effigies all look like you, and when you blew the jokes on you, you take it to your Twitter. But as for me and mine, we read the signs of the times and overdrive. Our hearts are heavy beating, heavy as hell, but all is well. We got soul to souls, we got rock and roll, and you're just sitting on your toilet tweeting. Clap your hands, move your ankles.